Okay, so what we are doing today is mostly exam review at the latter part of the class. We are going to start out talking about research strategy. You all should have a checklist. Everybody have a checklist? And as it turns out, this checklist will also be a good review of the course. In a strange sort of way, these 4 pages kind of encapsulate everything we've done for the past 4 months, believe it or not. So we'll go over the research strategy checklist. They're going to take a look at some other web and online resources really briefly. We'll go down to the library for a quick field trip, which I will show you important spots for the day of the exam, and I will tell you why they are important before we go down. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back, and we will go through the exam questions, as I have been promising all semester. And I will give you the handout of a print copy of the questions, and it will also be available on Twin. Okay, so let's get started. So as I said, this checklist, as it turns out, really covers everything that we've been talking about since January. And if you understand what all this is, why it's important, and how to navigate your way around everything that's mentioned in here, you're pretty much good to go for the exam. So by all means, ask questions. And there's actually more in here than we will be addressing in the exam, and I will go over that as well. So let's get started. Basically, as you can see up top, as a strategy, forgetting about the exam now, as a strategy, ask questions. Of course, I say ask a reference librarian. I'm biased, and if you're lucky enough to work somewhere, give us a call, but ask somebody questions. Frequently, when you think, oh, this is such a dumb question, it actually isn't, because it's something that someone maybe forgot to address or is unclear. So never be afraid to ask questions. Okay, so we started out the semester talking about issue spotting. So that's Roman numeral number 1, analyze facts and formulate preliminary questions. We talked about the importance of term generation. So for instance, back for our issue for the course with our client who had the heart condition, remember it turned out not to be a pre-existing condition question, but more of an HMO liability. Also not and looking at your assignment question, the false advertising, that when we did our issue spotting, we realized is not a products liability question because there was no product yet. So you want to think about both what the issue is as well as the terminology. We talked about this. You want to be flexible with your terms. You're not going to know how specific you can get until you do the research and see what comes up. So for our assignment question, some of you used the word tea, and that turned out to actually be kind of good. Food was also good, but you won't always be successful being that specific. Some of you tried the term polyphenol for our assignment. That turned out to be far too specific. And there's no way of knowing in advance what cases address what particular fact. So you need to be flexible. Try the very specific. Hey, if you find a case on polyphenols, great. If you find one on tea, also great. But if it turns out that you find one on food or beverage or drink, that's also relevant. So be flexible in terms of specificity, just in your terminology. You know, tea and drink are kind of synonymous, not really, but they sort of have the same idea. Terminology, again, when we talk, remember that our attorney malpractice question that a lot of people had a hard time because I chose specifically, intentionally, to phrase it about an attorney being a lawyer. I didn't even use the word attorney. A lawyer being sued for not updating. And, okay, so some of you tried research terms like superseded. Some of you thought to use research, and that issue, it turned out that the key terms were attorney, research, and malpractice. And once you hit upon those terms, you were going to find cases. But the only way to hit upon those terms were to be flexible and try different terms. Okay. So also you need to formulate your questions. As important, if not more important than the terminology. We didn't know anything about ERISA preemption until we started to do the research and realized, oh my goodness, we have to worry about this. We did further research and realized, okay, we also have to worry about if we're going to sue an HMO, federal court, state court, because of preemption, how are we going to sue them? What theories? Is there going to be negligence? Some of our secondary sources helped us address those questions. So classic issue spotting. Once you start to get a sense, as we did with our liability HMO question, then you want to start to see if you can find secondary sources to address the issue. And as we discovered, especially with the HMO liability question, that turned out to be critical because, again, we wouldn't have discovered preemption was so important unless we looked at secondary sources, unless, of course, you had prior knowledge. And that's actually stepping back to a good point. It depends where you start, depends on what you're starting with. If you already know something about the area, if someone's already given you a reference, that's going to change where you start, as opposed to not knowing anything and not really having any guidance in terms of sources, terminology, primary sources, cases, secondary sources. So assuming that you don't know anything, of course, we've talked a lot about secondary sources and why they're so useful. Remember research guides. We haven't talked about this for a long time, but research guides can be great. We've actually taken a look at some of them, and research guides there are all sorts of research guides on the web. The one research guide we looked at most recently was just for administrative decisions, but there are also topical research guides. Some of you in ACTEC have used a tax research guide that I put together to help you all out. There are all sorts of topics, research guides on various different topics. We, of course, looked at legal encyclopedias. And again, this is in the very beginning, assuming you don't know much about it. So AmJur, your state encyclopedia, New York Jur, since most of you will be here in New York. Even dictionaries. I overheard someone talking before class about the definition of a term. Googling is great. I'm not telling you not to Google. We'll talk about that in just a sec. But dictionaries, whether it's Black's dictionary or a regular old-fashioned English dictionary, can be pretty useful. We looked at ALR, kind of a funky hybrid. ALR turned out to be one of the great sources for our ERISA question. And I suggest here in the hint, you may want to start in a print index or an index that's online. It can be either. Now, I know in some of your assignments, some of you have mentioned, I don't want to go near the books. It's a pain in the neck. I have to drive all the way to Hofstra, and I get it. But remember, if you're having trouble coming up with the terminology, a resource like an index, print or online, or just looking at a table of contents of a relevant source, or a source at least that you can get in the general area, may really help you find that key terminology. And as I said, starting in Google, even Wikipedia, is fine as long as you don't stop there. And I have to tell you, other than this class, never refer to Wikipedia. I mean, it's great to check. It's got great references, and we're here to learn, good ways to find good resources. But when you get to your summer jobs, your full-time jobs, unless you really know the person well and they've chatted about it, I wouldn't fess up to looking at Wikipedia. I mean, use it, but don't cite to it. Everybody Googles, but again, obviously you weren't cite to Google. But again, don't stop there. And we talked a little bit about if you are Googling it and going to a free website, just take a moment to think, how reliable is this? Sort of what you think about when you look at Wikipedia. And we'll actually look later on when we talk about web resources. If you want to get more formal about how to judge a website, I'll show you a resource to show you how to do that. Okay, so we've checked secondary sources. So we did some searches and we came up with our ALR article on ERISA preemption. we then want to go a little bit further because remember, ALR got us started, but turns out preemption's pretty complex, and there are also all these other issues that we want to address. Can we sue for negligence? What are some of the other theories? We even discovered a suggestion on emotional distress for our liability HMO question. So this is where some of these more in-depth resources, treatises, law reviews, we looked at practice manuals, and don't worry about what the difference is between treatise and practice manual. It doesn't matter. What matters is it's useful. Form books, you all just finished your assignment and took a look, and we looked at finding some forms. That Amger proof of facts, that's the article I'm referring to that we discovered for liability HMO that was giving us some great theories of liability for our ERISA preemption question. And again, loose leaf services, and since we don't really use the loose leaves in print very much anymore, I don't have a good new name for that yet, but a source that brings everything together. So remember, for treatises, those research guides that just we're talking about are great references to help you find those treatises. With law reviews, when finding them, yes, full text searching on Lexis and Westlaw is just fine, but when you find you're doing your full text searching and you're getting articles that mention your terms but have nothing to do with your issue, remember the indexed legal periodicals. I'm not saying always start with the indexed legal periodicals. I'm certainly not saying don't do full text searching for law reviews, but when the easy way doesn't work, remember there are other resources, other tools in the toolbox. And remember, for all of these secondary sources, find out what your contract is for Lexis or Westlaw, wherever it is that you are working. Because the secondary sources, especially the treatises, especially the loose leaves, which is a type of treatise again, can be really, really, really expensive. So we focus a lot on using treatises on Lexis and Westlaw, and for the exam that will be totally fine. But in real life, again, summer job or job once you graduate, make sure you understand what the parameters are for where you're working. So again, our handout lists what secondary sources are going to help us with, so the general rules, and not just giving you references to the statutes, to the cases, but also giving you the context, explaining the relationship between preemption and between civil enforcement, our section 1144 in the U.S. Code and 1132, and why you care, what you might be able to do if you are preempted and can't sue in state court. Maybe you can sue under section 1132. Maybe you can find a theory of liability. And this is where your secondary sources, especially the more in-depth ones, like treatises, like proof of facts, like law review articles, can become really useful. Again, that terminology, always keep your antenna up for what's the terminology, because you will find inevitably that once you hit upon the key terminology, it then becomes really easy. Using secondary sources, finding cases, typically judges and experts are all going to kind of refer to it the same way. And again, I go back to our attorney malpractice question. Once we hit upon attorney malpractice research, we were going to find cases on that issue. And we talked about explaining issues, and of course, secondary sources let somebody else start you off and gather at least some of the primary resources. Don't reinvent the wheel. Some tips. We've talked a whole lot about using the table of contents, and you're going to see this table of contents tip throughout this research strategy, whether in print or online, and we've done that lots of times online especially. And one thing we haven't done so much, but referred to a little bit, once you're looking at something online, if you click on a particular chapter, usually on Westlaw, on Lexis, you can just search that chapter. So again, that can be useful. Remember also being aware in secondary sources how up-to-date your resource is. So remember the iLink on Westlaw and the publication info on Lexis. And I'll just show you that quickly as a reminder. So So I'm just going to pick a particular treatise here. You should see a little I link, and it'll tell you how current it is. And likewise on Lexis. Lexis makes it a little more difficult. You have to go into the table of contents. Yeah, I know. Keep on telling you about, and actually we looked at last time. If you're interested in copyright, the place to go is Nimmer Copyright. Lexis, if you go to this is a table of contents icon, whether that makes sense to you or not, and this publication info. And then you kind of just have to go through and guess which of these links. Copyright might be one, information might be one, just to see how up to date. Not every treatise is updated every year. And Lexis and Westlaw will have treatises that just aren't updated. Just know what you're looking at. Okay, so as you're looking at secondary sources, you're still getting to know the subject. Are they useful? Are they on point? Don't just go to a secondary source and use it, even though because it mentions your terms. A few of you in the assignment referred to criminal law resources. Now, yes, of course, our client wants to avoid criminal liability, but really she just wants to produce some tea and make sure the label's okay. Criminal law is pretty tenuous. So yes, very tangential. Don't start there. You might want to just double check at the end of your research, but make sure your secondary sources are actually solving the actual problem that your client presents. Make sure you're classifying the problem correctly. It's easy to forget, my state law, federal law, civil, procedural. Frequently, if you've got a procedural issue, it's both procedural and substantive. And be prepared to learn new and research new questions. That's what happened with our HMO liability question from the get-go. We learned about ERISA preemption, and then we realized, oh, wait a minute, there are all these other theories of liability that might help our client when we looked at that proof of facts. Negligence, as I said before, emotional distress. There was a whole theories of liability for HMO. There were like 4 or 5 different theories listed for us. That might be a whole 4 new areas of research as we think, oh, can we do this? Can we do that? You're representing your client. You're trying to do the best for her and see if you can get recovery from the HMO. So you want to see if any or several of those theories are useful. So be prepared to revise and add to your questions. And we talked a little bit, and I showed you a couple of links of examples of research logs. Keep track of what you do. Lexis and Westlaw both have their histories, as actually does Bloomberg. Inevitably, when you get out into practice in whatever kind of organization, you are going to get interrupted. You're going to get some emergency project, and then you're going to have to come back to your old project a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later. If you've kept some sort of track, then you won't have to start from scratch. Okay, so issue spotting secondary sources. Okay, let's dive into the law. So we talked about statutes, cases, and regulations, which include core rules, as well as other administrative materials. So let's start with statutes. If your issue is statutory, obviously not every issue is covered by statute, but more and more tend to be. Probably most importantly, that's not reflected in the paper that you have. And I realized this after I made all the copies, and so what's on the website now reflects this. But we talked a lot about it, so it should be in the notes. When you're looking at a statute, make sure that the statutory area you're in, the context you're in, is correct. Going back to our false advertising and tea problem. You want to make sure you're looking at false advertising for food or drink or tea. a few people got misdirected because they were looking in the alcohol section. Alcohol has its very own regulations that don't apply to tea, right? You can imagine states have lots of laws on alcohol and producing it and advertising it and all of that that aren't going to apply to every other type of beverage. So make sure you are within the statutory context. Sometimes I've heard it referred to as the statutory scheme. Basically, the way you do that is how? What's one of my favorite resources or favorite tools in any resource we looked at? Already talked about it?
Table of contents.
Table of contents. So the statutory scheme is just in the table of contents. So, make sure you're not in alcohol section, but you're actually in agricultural markets, which I know sounded a little funky to some of you starting out, and I don't blame you because you certainly don't think of tea in agriculture. But again, you got to be a little flexible. So look at that statutory scheme. Look at the hierarchy of your table of contents. So, of course, you want to follow up on any references you get to secondary sources. That's one of the great things about starting with secondary sources. Hopefully it gives you references. But you also want to do an independent search. Remember, those references from the secondary source, or if you go into an index, may or may not get you to the best section or even a relevant section. But if it gets you to the general area, again, using that wonderful table of contents, you can frequently find the relevant section or sections that are useful. So again, just giving you the example of the table of contents. So maybe we got the reference from the ALR article on preemption, so we got the reference to 1144, but look, there's this whole chapter on ERISA. So it might be worth looking through, again, the statutory context or statutory scheme, as well as doing a keyword search. You want to try a couple of approaches. And again, the strategy I'm talking about here is a boil the ocean strategy. This is when you really want to do as much as you possibly can for the particular client. You're sometimes going to get asked, just go quick and dirty, find me a couple of cases on. Then that's what you're going to do, and you're not going to go through all of these steps. But when you need to do a complete project, these are the tools that you'll be using, and this is a strategy I hope that you will find useful. Okay. So again, check the table of contents as well as do an independent search. Obviously, you're going to read the full text of the statutes. That's something I have tended to skip over because we're talking about research tools and strategies, but that's really critical. You can't skip it in real life. We talked, of course, about how wonderful the annotated code is. It's your best BFF, best friend, because it's got all these other features, notes of decisions, case analysis, citing references, context and analysis, so you can see other secondary sources, you can see cases that interpret. We've talked a lot about this. Legislative history. We spent a fair amount of time on legislative history. Some of you will never do it again. Some of you will. And I hear time and again from law firm librarians, because I was thinking about dropping it from the course a while back, but I heard time and again from law firm librarians who work with attorneys in commercial context, please teach legislative history, if only so you just understand the process. So don't lose sleep over legislative history, and we touched on it. You are by no means experts. Honestly, I know librarians who aren't that comfortable with it, I hate to say. But I'm hoping if you understand the process and understand what the documents are and why it is you might want to check them, that when the time comes, you can reinvent, ask for help, of course. But so as a quick review, you're doing it, of course, to find out what the intent of the legislature was when they created the statutory language. Best place to look for that, anybody remember? It's right on here too. Best single document, legislative history document?
Committee report.
Committee report. So right here on our checklist here, check the committee report. And remember, related to that is the conference committee report. And the citation is going to look very similar. Now, to find these documents, you want that all-important public law number, or here in New York State, it's the all-important chapter law number. And you find that where?
Credits.
On Westlaw, it's called credits. So at the bottom, back in the old days, I just called it a parenthetical, which is still accurate because it's in parentheses if you notice them. Lexis calls it history. Basically, the PL or CH chapter or Pub L citations you see after the text of the statute. And then once you get your public law number, or really you need to get your public law number by looking at, on Westlaw, it's called Editors and Revisers Notes. On the print, it's called Historical and Statutory Notes. On Lexis, again, it's just in that whole history section. But this is what will tell you what public law made what change, and then you can figure out which public law. Sometimes you might have to look at more than one. Typically, it's going to be the first one, but if your language, if your statutory language was adopted in an amendment, then you would need a later public law. So you can see Westlaw also calls it historical and statutory notes. And then you just read what the different amendments did. And you have something, again, it's just called something different on Lexis. It's under the history. In terms of state, it works pretty much the same way, but you'll find a lot less. So you're going to look for, you remember what they're called? What the document collection is called in New York of legislative history documents? McKinney Session Laws is one place you'll find documents. But I'm thinking of their overall collection. The governor pulls them together and calls them, well, the governor's office. Bill jacket, excellent. Don't worry, that's I'm not going to ask you to look at bill jackets on the exam. But good to remember it's called bill jackets, because if you do have to research legislative history in New York and you see a reference to bill jackets, you think, hooray, that's what I'm looking for, if you can remember. Okay, and again on our checklist, true for secondary sources, especially true for, even more true, if you could be even more true for primary sources, update, update, update. Now, it's not a huge, it's actually really easy these days. So just because it's easy doesn't mean it's not important. In fact, it's critical. So here on Westlaw, you just want to be aware of how up-to-date your section is. So you want to look just for those flags, our bibliographic awareness theme. So you see there's proposed legislation. It's not passed yet, so it hasn't affected our section yet. Maybe we want to look at it if this is an issue we're going to be following long term, or maybe we're good, 1144 is still good. Oh, unconstitutional or preempted, we better check that out, although in this case it's a prior version's limitation. So we might take a quick look at the case to see how it limited 1144. If it probably doesn't affect us, so we're good. Always also good just to see how up-to-date Westlaw is again, or Lexis, again, the currentness link on Westlaw. So we know it's getting kind of old. It's kind of interesting. Westlaw is approved current through the end of 2015. I don't know how much has been passed in the last few months, but I do know Congress has passed a few public laws. But you would get some sort of signal. And Lexis, again, actually Lexis is kind of easier, I think. God, Lexis is not going to understand my typo, however. You know, computers are really smart when they understand your typos. And this is actually one of my pet peeves about Lexis is you got to go back out just to enter a citation. Come on. And it's on the slow side sometimes. So I've joked throughout the course about banging the table and update, not to confuse you or make you think, oh my God, this is a horrible, onerous task. It's really easy, but you got to do it. So again, oh, see, look at this. Lexis is a little more up to date. So current through approved March 18th, and with a gap of this one particular public law. And it works the same way well, actually, let's hold off on that thought. So again, critical to update, not really that difficult. And turning to page, any questions so far? I'm just moving along here. This is all, everything we've gone over. This is just a checklist. Okay, so we already talked about the importance of table of contents, the critical importance of table of contents in statutory codes. Moving on to case research. Now, as law students and budding attorneys, you've been talking about cases for 2 or 3 years now. Just about every new attorney I run into in the reference desk wants to start their research in cases, which is okay if A, you know it's governed by case law, or you've been referred to go, please find me cases, but not the best place to start if you don't know anything about an issue and you're just trying to find an answer to an overall issue. So I would not start research cases unless I had a very specific reason to. And again, the strategy is very similar. Follow up to references you got at secondary sources. Remember in our ERISA question, we kept on running into a reference to Aetna v. Davila, a Supreme Court case. So wow, you get a Supreme Court case, you're definitely going to check that out no matter what. So I'm definitely going to follow that up. Follow up whatever other references that sound like they are going to be relevant cases. Maybe, again, if it's a statutory issue, there's a good case you found in the notes of decision. And remember, those notes of decisions are going to have those nice topic headings that are going to give us a clue. I mean, 1144, if we go to case notes, there will be probably hundreds and hundreds of cases. You don't want to read through every single case, right? So here are these nice topic, consistent with ERISA state laws. Maybe that's particular cases. And go down and look at those cases. So maybe you get a case reference from our BFF, the annotated code. Doesn't hurt to do a quick check on Google Scholar. Remember, Google Scholar is separate from regular Google. You need to Google Scholar and then click on the Cases radio button. You can try doing a general case research in regular Google, but you won't get very much Google Scholars, just cases. These are all good ways to get that one good case. Once you find that one good case, look at it and take advantage of the information it provides, the headnotes or the topic and key number. Remember, on the West system, the topic and key number is a two-parter. It's like an address. You have the street name and you have the street number. You need both parts. So if we go to, let's see if Westlaw's, how smart Westlaw is. It's pretty smart. So if we go to our one good case, however we got there, take a look again, topic and key number. Let's scroll down to one of the relevant ones we've used. So insurance is the topic. The actual key number is 1117 subdivision 3. And here's the hierarchy, again, the topic analysis. So it's the key number itself talks about healthcare benefits. That's the key number name, if you will. And it comes within this hierarchy of topics. Here's a totally different topic and key number, labor and employment. Again, the hierarchy and the actual key number, which isn't really of interest to us, de novo. But here's one that is preemption. The preemption is that the name of the key number. The key number is 607. And it comes under the topic health, and the topic number of health is 198H. Again, just to review, and a few people have gotten confused about that. So hopefully that's, does that make sense? I hope I haven't confused anybody, because that's obviously the last thing I want to do. Okay. So topic and key numbers. You need two pieces of information, just like an address. You need the street name and you need the street number. So the street name is like the topic, the whole big long street. So the street name, our topic, is health. And health is assigned a number, like 6th Avenue in New York has a name. It's called Avenue of the Americas, but it's also called 6th Avenue. Okay. Pardon me?
On the test, we want both the number and
Actually, if you give me, for the topic, if you give me either one, you say health topic. Actually, I prefer the name, because when I don't remember all the topic numbers, if you gave me 198H, I don't know that I'd remember. Oh, that's health, because they're 400 something. I haven't memorized them. But if you give me the number, I will figure it out.
So on the exam, if you ask for the key number, you don't want the whole thing, the topic number plus whatever the key number.
If you give me 198H, you're going to see what I'm going to ask you for key numbers in the exam in the second half of class. And I'll go over that again, but to answer your question now, when you talk about key numbers, I'm going to ask you to refer to useful key numbers. And if this is a useful key number, you can refer to the health topic, key number 607 preemption. If you give me 198H, 607 preemption, that's okay too. I'd really like the name of the key number, because then that tells me what it's about and whether it's relevant or not. If you forget, if I can find it relatively easily, I won't have a problem with it. If you start making me search for 10, 15 minutes for everything you refer to, then I'm going to have a problem. But we'll talk about that more. So again, the health, key number 607 preemption. But do you understand how the key numbers are referenced? I have to say that's the one good thing about the Lexis headnotes, is it's just a string of description. Federal preemption in general, general overview. So now that I've said that, I should probably show it. Oh, see, Lexis is pretty smart too. So there you go. There you see the head notes. So pension and benefits law, ERISA, federal preemption, general overview. So you don't have to worry about numbers and names, and it's all just words. But again, using the one good case, either on Westlaw, topic and key number, Lexis head note, to find other good cases, even if your case is in a totally different jurisdiction. So if you find a Minnesota case and your jurisdiction is New Jersey, find a good topic key number or head note, and then use that to navigate your way to your jurisdiction, or hopefully there's something in your jurisdiction. And that's the beauty of the one good case approach. Another way to use one good case is Shepard's and Keysight. They are critical for updating, which we'll talk about in a sec, but they're also a great way to find other cases, because these are cases that cite to your case. So if you've got a good case, find other cases that cite to it. Maybe they're good cases too. And then you can get really sophisticated by using Shepard's with the head notes, or Keysight with the topics and key numbers, again, to find other cases on your topic. Again, just like with statutes, use multiple approaches. Maybe you've got great keywords, maybe you don't have the great keywords. But if you start with the keywords and then see if you can find useful topics and key numbers, using both approaches will maximize the likelihood that you find the relevant cases. Likewise, topics and key numbers aren't always great. You sometimes won't find any, or they won't really be on your, they'll be sort of close. In our example with ERISA preemption, there are actually several different topics and key numbers that are relevant that address different parts of the issue, because ours is a pretty complex issue. So again, using multiple approaches, again, when you need to do thorough, in-depth research, not a quick and dirty, using multiple approaches will be beneficial. And again, as you can see on the research strategy, remember to use Shepard's or Keysight or BSight to make sure your case is still valid. And obviously looking at the court for its authority over your case and looking at the issue, whatever issue you're interested in your case. Just because another case is reversed on one issue doesn't mean it's reversed on your issue. Questions on cases? Okay, we just got finished, or you just handed in your assignment on administrative materials. So, regulations. What did the agencies do? Congress, the state legislature delegated its authority to these various agencies: environment, health, tax, food and drug, and they promulgated these regulations, and we talked about that whole process. Those regulations are part of the law. They are primary sources. They are just about as important as the statutes. I say just about because a statute has authority, greater authority than a regulation. But you still need to find those regulations. And sometimes those regulations are key to your issue. They provide further implementation detail. They provide definitions of terminology. They provide the actual guidance for actually how many parts per billion, and we talked all about this. I go over it again just because it's, I think, an area of law that many of you are least familiar with, so are least used to thinking about and checking for, but it is still critical to do so. And the strategy is the same. Start with those secondary sources. You may or may not get references to the regulations. Look in the annotated code, look in the citing references, look in the research references on Lexis to see if they give you reference. Now, those references may or may not be at all relevant. They may be sort of relevant, and once again, that's where the table of contents is going to help you, because it might get you to the general area. Maybe it'll get you to the right title of the CFR or the state administrative code. Maybe it'll get you to the right part of the CFR. Remember, the CFR is subdivided into parts, and then each part is subdivided into individual sections. Probably like happened to us with when we were looking at federal administrative materials, we got to the part. We got a reference to Part 2560 in Title 29 of the CFR, which is the labor title. We got reference to 2590. And then we looked in those parts and realized that all the various sections that might be of interest. There were actually a couple of parts we didn't get reference to, but by looking at the overall table of contents, we saw the different parts that might be relevant and investigated them. So with regulations, the table of contents is critical, because you most likely won't get reference exactly to the right section or exactly to all of the relevant sections. So again, secondary sources annotated code may get you started, but you don't want to stop there. You'll probably also want, not probably, you will definitely also want to do a keyword search. You might also get references, administrative areas of the law. There'll tend to be more of the practice guides that we encountered, these formerly known as loose leaf, and who knows what they're going to be called now, resources like we were looking at the Food and Drug Reporter on CCH, some of the other titles that you did the workshop on last time. They tend to be more administrative areas, so those will help you in not only getting reference to the regulations, but understanding how they actually apply in real life situations, and hopefully one close to yours. Yes, there is an index to the CFR, always worth a try as well. So again, use multiple approaches. And again, also requires updating, and updating. Same process. It's a code. The regulations are put in a code just the way the statutes are put in a code. And remember, a code is just a subject arrangement. So let's see if I can remember the CFR section here. 20. let's just go to 2590. So here's the whole park. So again, you can see how so here's the table of contents of, we're in part 2590. It's actually divided into subpart D and then finally subdivided into different sections. And yet it takes some time and you need to be methodical about it, but the only way to really know with the CFR that you're finding what you need to find is just by scanning through and investigating what looks like it's relevant. So again, here's the section. Now it's interesting because Rafi discovered this earlier. I don't know what's going on with Lexis here, and why instead of the update message you have something about Title III materials. It should be there. And if you are taking the exam and you encounter something weird like this, tell me what you did. Say, I looked at the top on Lexis and I thought it was supposed to tell me when it's updated, but instead it told me Title III materials have been extracted. And if I see that you tell me what you did and I see that you checked the right place, then that'll be good. So let's look at this quickly on Westlaw. And again, you have the hierarchy, the context, so how you would get into the table of contents, of course, on Westlaw, pretty straightforward. And Westlaw gives you the currentness link, so CFR is pretty current. And again, easy but critical. Just take a look, say, okay, April 15th. Westlaw should be pretty good about letting you know how up to date. If there's anything pending, you should see a red flag. Likewise, Lexis. And we talked about the eCFR if you really wanted to, although the eCFR sometimes isn't much more up to date than Lexis and Westlaw, but that's another actually free resource to go to. And if you are in a heavily regulated area, check for administrative decisions. Again, you can do so on citing references. You can look on Lexis for their references. So actually we see for this particular section, administrative decisions and guidance. And you would want to do a regular keyword search and look on the left for the different document types, and you would see the administrative decisions. So if there's anything on Lexis, probably you would find it either shepherdizing or looking at the research references. And again, also doing a separate keyword search and looking for administrative decisions. The other way to do that, again, for free, which honestly is probably just as good as Lexis and Westlaw, because Lexis and Westlaw are pretty hit or miss for admin decisions. I showed you that Virginia library guide, research guide that I referred to earlier, and that just lists the agencies and the agency's decisions. Or you can just Google if you know the agency you're after, Department of Labor. And actually we talked about the advanced site search on Google. So if you Google the Department of Labor, you could do site : the web address, www.dol.gov, whatever it is, and then your search terms. Any questions about admin materials? Don't forget about them. We looked last class at the one-stop research, what used to be called loose leafs back in the old days, and I still haven't found a good name, the practice materials, American jurisprudence, proof of facts, causes of action, that have all these really practically oriented checklists and forms, interrogatories, you name it, that can be really helpful. And I know a lot of attorneys have found them as such. Just remember they exist. Again, be very careful in using them on Lexus and Westlaw because they can also be very expensive.